Rome had conquered the Mediterranean. It had crushed Carthage. It had absorbed Greece. And under Augustus, it had become the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. Legions marched beneath crimson banners. Eagles glinted in the sun. Cities fell, one by one. To the north, tribes were subdued. To the west, kingdoms were erased. To the east, rivals were broken. And then Rome looked south, beyond Egypt, beyond the fertile Nile, into lands the Romans barely understood. A land of gold, of ancient temples carved into stone, of warriors raised beneath the desert sun. The Kingdom of Kush. To Rome, it was just another frontier, another name to add to the map, another people to conquer. But Kush was not weak, and Kush was not afraid, because Kush was ruled by a queen. Not a ceremonial figure, not a silent consort, but a warrior, a ruler who would stand at the front of her army, a woman who would lose an eye in battle and refuse to surrender. Her name was Amanirenas. When Roman soldiers crossed the border, they expected submission. Instead, they found resistance. Cities burned, statues of Augustus were torn down, and Roman pride was shattered in the desert. For the first time, the empire that believed itself unstoppable met a force it could not easily break. This was not just a border skirmish, this was a war between Rome and an African kingdom determined to remain free. And at the center of it all stood a queen who would force Rome to negotiate rather than conquer. This is the story of the African queen who made Rome kneel. Before Amanirenas ever lifted a sword, before Roman legions crossed the southern frontier, the world was already changing. Rome was no longer a republic. It was an empire. And at its helm stood a man named Augustus. After decades of civil war, after betrayal, assassinations, and bloodshed, Augustus had done what no Roman before him had achieved. He brought order. But Roman order came at a cost. Egypt fell first. After the defeat of Cleopatra and Mark Antony, Egypt, the wealthiest kingdom of the ancient world, became a Roman province. Its grain fed Roman cities, its gold enriched Roman treasuries, its Nile flowed under Roman control. And once Rome tasted Egypt's wealth, it did not stop looking south. Beyond Egypt, the Nile continued, through lands the Romans called Nubia. To them, it was distant, foreign, exotic. But to its people, it was home. This was the Kingdom of Kush, a civilization older than many realized, a kingdom that had once ruled Egypt itself, a people who built pyramids, who mastered iron, who traded gold, ivory, and precious goods across Africa. Kush was not a minor tribe at the edge of the world. It was organized, strategic, and proud. Its rulers carried the title Kandake, not queen in the Roman sense, but a ruling monarch, often female, often powerful. This alone unsettled Rome. In the Roman world, power belonged to men. Women influenced politics, but they did not command armies. Kush was different. There, a woman could rule, and not from behind a curtain, but from the front lines. As Augustus secured Egypt, Roman officials began pushing south. They imposed taxes on border cities. They stationed soldiers. They tested limits. To Rome, this was standard expansion. To Kush, it was intrusion. Tensions simmered quietly at first. Trade routes became strained. Local skirmishes broke out. Roman governors believed Kush would eventually submit. After all, who could stand against Rome? But Kush had something Rome underestimated: unity. The desert forged resilience. The Nile taught discipline, and its leadership would not tolerate humiliation. When Roman tax collectors demanded tribute from Kushite-controlled cities, resentment turned to anger, and anger turned to defiance. In 24 BCE, the fragile balance shattered. Kush struck first. Kushite forces advanced north into Roman Egypt. They attacked garrisons, they captured cities, they even seized statues of Augustus himself. Symbols of Roman dominance torn down, defaced, buried beneath temple steps. It was more than a rebellion. It was a statement. Rome was not untouchable. Augustus could not ignore this insult. To challenge Rome's authority was to challenge the empire itself. And so, the legions marched south, not to negotiate, not to compromise, but to crush. They expected a swift campaign, a demonstration of power, a reminder of who ruled the world. What they did not expect was resistance led by a queen who would not retreat, a queen who would fight even after losing an eye in battle, a queen whose name would echo across the desert, Amanirenas. And as Roman standards moved deeper into Kushite lands, the stage was set for a war that would test Rome's pride and prove that even the greatest empire could bleed.
Chapter 2. The World Before. Before Kush defied Rome, before Amanirenas became a symbol of resistance, the Mediterranean world was transforming. The Roman Republic was gone. In its place stood something new, an empire, and at its center, a man who would reshape history, Augustus. Born Octavian, he had survived civil war, outmaneuvered rivals, defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and in 27 BCE, he became Rome's first emperor, not in name, but in power. Rome no longer debated expansion, it assumed it. Under Augustus, legions moved with discipline and precision. Gaul was secured, Spain pacified, the eastern Mediterranean stabilized. Rome was no longer fighting for survival, it was organizing dominance. And then Egypt fell. The defeat of Cleopatra and Antony at Actium was more than a military victory. It was economic transformation. Egypt was not just another province, it was Rome's breadbasket. Its grain fed hundreds of thousands in Rome. Its wealth strengthened imperial coffers. Its Nile controlled trade routes stretching into Africa. When Augustus absorbed Egypt, Rome gained something priceless: stability. But stability required security, and security required borders. To the south of Egypt, the Nile did not end. It flowed deeper into Africa, into lands known to Romans as Nubia, modern-day Sudan. To Roman officials, this region represented both opportunity and uncertainty. Opportunity because of gold, because of ivory, because of trade routes reaching into sub-Saharan Africa. Uncertainty because it was controlled by a kingdom they did not rule, the Kingdom of Kush. Unlike scattered tribes at distant frontiers, Kush was structured, urban, organized. Its capital shifted between Napata and Meroe. Its rulers commanded armies. Its economy thrived on iron production and long-distance trade. And perhaps most importantly, Kush controlled the Nile corridor south of Egypt. For Rome, control of the Nile meant control of wealth. Any independent power along that river posed a strategic risk. Roman governors in Egypt began observing Kush carefully. At first, relations were stable, trade moved peacefully, borders were loosely respected. But Rome's nature was expansion. Roman administration believed that security meant influence, influence meant oversight, oversight meant pressure. Gradually, Roman officials tested boundaries. They imposed taxes in disputed regions, stationed soldiers in border cities, demanded tribute from settlements historically aligned with Kush.
To Rome, this was precaution. To Kush, it was encroachment. Augustus did not initially intend full-scale invasion. His priority was consolidation, but frontier politics have a way of escalating. Local Roman commanders sought to prove loyalty, border disputes intensified, minor clashes broke out, and the Nile, once a shared artery of trade, became a line of tension. Rome viewed Kush as manageable, a regional kingdom. Strong, yes, but no match for legions. Roman confidence was not arrogance without cause. They had crushed Carthage, absorbed Greece, defeated Egypt. What was one more kingdom? Yet Kush was not passive. It had history, it had identity, and it had leadership prepared to defend sovereignty. The stage was set. On one side, the most powerful empire the Mediterranean had ever seen. On the other, an African kingdom that had survived centuries beside giants. Augustus sought stability, but stability in Rome's language often meant dominance. Kush sought independence, and independence required resolute. As Roman standards flew over Egypt, as tax collectors extended their reach southward, as governors assessed the desert frontier, the balance grew fragile. What began as cautious diplomacy would soon transform into confrontation. And in that moment, the world would witness something rare, not Rome conquering effortlessly, but Rome being challenged, and the deserts of Kush would become the proving ground.
Chapter 3. Who was Amanirenas? Before she defied Rome, before her name traveled along the Nile, before Roman governors spoke of rebellion, Amanirenas was a daughter of Kush. And Kush was not ordinary. South of Egypt, where the Nile bends through desert stone, rose a civilization older than many realized, the Kingdom of Kush. A land of iron furnaces glowing red at night, of pyramids rising sharply against the sky, of temples carved with symbols that spoke of gods, kings, and eternity. This was not a fringe territory. This was a power in its own right. For centuries, Kush had traded gold, ivory, incense, and precious goods across Africa. It had once ruled Egypt itself. It had absorbed influences but never lost its identity. And at the center of Kushite power stood a tradition that startled outsiders. Women ruled. Not symbolically, not temporarily, but institutionally. The title was Kandake. To Roman ears, it translated loosely as queen, but that word fails to capture its weight. Kandake meant sovereign authority. It meant ruler of armies. It meant final voice in matters of war and diplomacy. Unlike Rome, where women shaped power quietly from within villas and palaces, in Kush, a woman could stand openly at the throne. She could command generals. She could issue decrees. She could negotiate with foreign envoys. This was the political environment Amanirenas was born into. She did not grow up in a world that told her leadership was impossible. She grew up watching it. Royal courts in Kush were not silent chambers of ceremony. They were centers of strategy. Advisors debated trade routes, priests interpreted omens, generals studied borders, and young members of the royal family observed it all. Though historical records are incomplete, we can imagine her early life shaped by preparation. She would have learned diplomacy before she learned war, language before weapons, ceremony before command. But strength was never far away. Kush was forged by geography. The desert hardened its people, the Nile disciplined them. Isolation demanded resilience. Leadership required adaptability. From an early age, Amanirenas would have understood something essential. Power was fragile. Egypt had fallen to Rome.
Cleopatra had once ruled magnificently and then vanished into history. Empires could collapse quickly. Kush had survived because it balanced force with intelligence. By the time Amanirenas ascended to the throne, Rome had already absorbed Egypt. The southern horizon was no longer quiet. Roman officials watched the border. Tax demands extended into contested territories. Trade routes shifted under imperial oversight. The political climate was tense, and she stepped into power at exactly that moment. We do not know whether she inherited the throne directly or shared authority with a co-ruler, but we know this. When Rome tested Kush, she was already Kandake, already prepared, already decisive. Unlike Roman emperors who inherited vast bureaucracies, Kushite rulers governed more personally. Their authority was visible. They were expected to lead, not hide. Traditions suggest Amanirenas was not distant from her people. She was present, direct, strong-willed. And when Roman pressure increased, she did not react impulsively. She assessed, she calculated. Because in Kush, leadership was not emotional theater, it was strategic endurance. Some accounts, preserved through fragments and later interpretations, describe her as fierce in temperament. Others suggest she possessed remarkable patience, but both qualities can coexist. A patient ruler can still be unbreakable. A strategic mind can still command a battlefield. And as Roman influence expanded southward, she understood what was at stake. If Kush paid tribute once, Rome would return again. If Kush surrendered territory quietly, that territory would never return. The Nile was not simply water. It was economic survival. It was trade. It was identity. To lose control of the Nile corridor was to lose sovereignty. Amanirenas knew this, and she understood something Rome underestimated. Kush was not intimidated by size. It had survived Egypt. It had thrived beside greater powers. It had endured centuries of shifting alliances. It would not disappear quietly. By the time Roman governors demanded submission, Amanirenas was not an uncertain monarch. She was seasoned, surrounded by advisors, supported by tradition, grounded in a political system that legitimized her authority. She did not need to prove she belonged on the throne. She already did. And so when the moment came, when Rome's shadow stretched further south, she did not retreat behind palace walls. She prepared. She strengthened alliances. She assessed troop readiness. She fortified positions. Not recklessly, but deliberately. Because leadership is not defined by the absence of fear, it is defined by the refusal to yield to it. And Amanirenas would soon face the most powerful empire on earth. Not as a rebel, not as an insurgent, but as a sovereign ruler defending her kingdom.
Chapter 4. Rome invades. War does not begin with trumpets. It begins with arrogance. After absorbing Egypt, Rome believed the south would follow. Roman officials stationed troops along the Nile. Tax collectors pushed deeper into contested cities. Border garrisons expanded. To Augustus, this was routine administration. To Kush, it was provocation. For months, tension simmered. Messengers traveled between border settlements. Local commanders tested authority. Roman standards crept farther south. And then, Kush struck. In 24 BCE, Kushite forces crossed into Roman-controlled Egypt. Swift, unexpected, disciplined. They attacked garrisons at Syene and Philae. Roman soldiers, confident in imperial supremacy, were caught unprepared. Cities fell. Statues of Augustus were seized. One account claims a bronze head of the emperor was taken and buried beneath temple steps in Kush. a message. Rome could be humiliated. Rome could be touched. When news reached Augustus, it was not merely a military issue. It was personal, an insult to imperial authority. He ordered retaliation. The Roman governor of Egypt, Gaius Petronius, was tasked with restoring control. And Petronius did not hesitate. Legions marched south. Disciplined ranks of soldiers, metal armor gleaming beneath the desert sun. Shields locked, standards raised, they advanced with confidence. After all, no African kingdom had ever defeated Rome. At least, not permanently. The first clashes were brutal. Roman legions reclaimed lost Egyptian cities. Kushite forces retreated strategically, drawing Romans deeper into unfamiliar terrain. The desert does not favor invaders. Heat drained strength. Supply lines stretched thin. Yet Rome pressed on. Petronius marched into Kushite territory. He captured Napata, a sacred Kushite city. Temples were looted, structures burned, prisoners taken. To Rome, this was demonstration. To Kush, it was desecration. And this is where legend meets history. Some traditions say that during these campaigns, Amanirenas fought personally, that she stood among her warriors, that in one clash she lost an eye. Whether struck by arrow or blade, whether in direct combat or nearby chaos, the image remains powerful. A queen, wounded but unbroken. Rome expected submission. Instead, they encountered resistance that refused to collapse. Kush did not rely on Roman-style formation warfare. They adapted. They moved through desert terrain Romans barely understood. Hit-and-run tactics, ambushes near river crossings, sudden night raids on camps. Roman soldiers trained for structured battlefield dominance. Kushite warriors trained for survival. The desert became their ally. The Nile became their supply route. Petronius believed he had crippled Kush by capturing Napata. But Kush did not fight for a single city. It fought for autonomy. After burning Napata, Roman forces withdrew north. They fortified border regions, believing the lesson had been delivered. They underestimated Amanirenas, because the war was not over. Kushite resistance continued. Raids harassed Roman positions. Trade routes were disrupted. Roman control of southern Egypt remained unstable. And something unexpected began to happen. Rome slowed. Not because it could not destroy Kush, but because it calculated the cost. The territory offered little grain compared to Egypt. The desert required constant military presence. Each campaign drained resources. Augustus had larger priorities: internal stability, northern frontiers, political consolidation. Kush was no longer a quick victory. It was a complication. Amanirenas understood this. She did not need to conquer Rome. She needed to make conquest inconvenient, costly, unattractive. And she succeeded. Eventually, negotiations began. Not surrender, negotiation. In 21 BCE, envoys from Kush met Roman representatives. Terms were discussed, and the outcome shocked many. Rome agreed to withdraw from certain territories. No tribute would be imposed on Kush. Borders were stabilized. Peace on relatively equal terms. For Rome, this was not a glorious conquest. It was a compromise. For Kush, it was survival without submission. A queen had faced the most powerful empire of the age and preserved her kingdom's independence. Rome did not parade Kushite captives in triumph. It did not annex the kingdom. It did not install a puppet ruler. It negotiated. That alone speaks volumes. In Roman records, the conflict is minimized, brief, administrative. But between the lines is respect. Respect for a kingdom that did not collapse. Respect for leadership that would not bend.
And at the center of it all was a queen who understood warfare was not always about annihilation. Sometimes it is about endurance, about proving that conquest will not be easy, about forcing an empire to reconsider. In the burning sands south of Egypt, Rome learned something rare. There were lands it could dominate, and there were lands that would fight back. Amanirenas did not destroy Rome. She did something more remarkable. She made Rome hesitate. And for an empire built on unstoppable expansion, hesitation was almost defeat.
War had proven something. Kush would not collapse. Rome could burn cities. Rome could seize territory, but Rome could not secure submission. And so, the battlefield shifted, not to desert plains, but to negotiation tables. The Roman governor of Egypt, Gaius Petronius, had marched deep into Kushite land. He had captured Napata. He had demonstrated Roman strength. But even he understood something crucial. Total conquest would require permanent occupation. Permanent occupation required resources, and resources were limited. Augustus was consolidating power in Rome, securing borders in Europe, stabilizing internal politics. An endless southern campaign offered little reward. Kush, meanwhile, had endured. Its capital relocated, its leadership intact, its resistance unbroken. Amanirenas knew this was the moment. Victory does not always come through annihilation. Sometimes it comes through leverage. Envoys were sent. Diplomats traveled north along the Nile. Meetings were arranged. Roman officials expected submission terms, tribute, hostages, political humiliation. But what unfolded was different. Kushite representatives did not arrive as defeated supplicants. They arrived as equals. They argued that Roman expansion into their territory had violated prior understandings. They demanded restoration of borders. They refused tribute. And remarkably, Rome listened. We must understand how unusual this was. Rome imposed tribute on defeated nations. It annexed territories routinely. It replaced rulers with loyal governors. Yet in this case, it reconsidered. The final treaty, though recorded briefly in Roman sources, revealed something extraordinary. Rome agreed to withdraw from certain contested territories. No tribute would be paid by Kush. The southern border would remain stable, and peace would follow. This was not surrender. This was recognition. Recognition that Kush was not easily subdued. Recognition that continued war offered diminishing returns. Recognition that Amanirenas had successfully defended sovereignty. Imagine the symbolism. An empire that prided itself on domination, choosing compromise. Not because it was weak, but because it calculated the cost. And the cost was too high. There would be no Roman province of Kush, no Roman governor installed in Napata, no parade of Kushite captives in Rome. Instead, there was peace. For decades after, relations between Rome and Kush stabilized. Trade resumed, borders quieted. The Nile flowed without armies marching beside it. And Kush remained independent. Let that settle. Rome conquered Egypt. Rome conquered Gaul. Rome crushed Judea. But Rome did not conquer Kush. It negotiated. This distinction matters because in the ancient world, negotiation with Rome was rare. It signaled respect, reluctant, perhaps, but real. For Amanirenas, this was the true victory. Not the burning of Roman camps, not the humiliation of statues, but the preservation of autonomy. Her kingdom remained sovereign. Her people remained unruled by foreign governors. Her desert remained hers. Some Roman historians later minimized the conflict, reduced it to administrative inconvenience.
But silence can reveal as much as triumph. Empires celebrate victories loudly. They mention stalemates quietly. And here, Rome was quiet. For Amanirenas, history would not build statues in marble halls. Rome would not immortalize her name. But in Kush, her legacy endured. She had faced the greatest empire of her time and preserved her nation. Not through reckless aggression, not through endless war, but through calculated resistance and strategic peace. When the dust settled, it was not Rome's banner flying over Kush. It was Kush's banner still flying in the desert wind. And that was enough. Chapter 6. Legacy. History remembers empires. It remembers conquerors. It remembers men who expanded borders, but it often forgets those who defended them. Amanirenas did not build an empire that stretched across continents. She did something far more difficult. She protected one. And perhaps that is why her name does not echo as loudly as Augustus. Rome wrote much of the ancient record. Roman historians celebrated Roman victories, and when Rome did not win decisively, the story grew smaller, shorter, quieter. In Roman texts, the Kushite conflict is brief, administrative, a border disturbance, not a defining war. But absence does not mean insignificance. It means perspective. Africa's ancient kingdoms rarely controlled the narrative of global history. Their victories were not carved into European marble. Their queens were not immortalized in Western epics. Instead, their stories survived in fragments, in archaeology, in temple inscriptions, in the quiet resilience of cultural memory. The Kingdom of Kush endured for centuries after its conflict with Rome. Its pyramids still stand in Sudan today. Its iron industries shaped regional trade. Its traditions of female leadership remain one of the most remarkable features of ancient governance. Amanirenas was not an anomaly. She was part of a system that allowed women to rule with authority. In a world where Rome limited female power, Kush institutionalized it. That contrast alone challenges common narratives of ancient civilization. And yet, how many know her name? How many textbooks mention her alongside Augustus? How many documentaries explore her strategy, her resilience, her refusal to bow? Very few, because history often magnifies expansion, not resistance. But resistance matters. Amanirenas demonstrated something profound. Power is not measured only by how much you conquer. It is measured by what you refuse to surrender. When Rome absorbed Egypt, many assumed the south would follow. It did not. When Roman legions marched confidently into Kushite territory, they expected swift submission. They did not receive it. Instead, they encountered a kingdom that calculated carefully, fought strategically, and negotiated from strength. This was not reckless rebellion. It was deliberate sovereignty. And that distinction is important, because too often African resistance is simplified, reduced, mischaracterized. Amanirenas was not acting out of chaos. She was defending political independence, economic autonomy, cultural identity. Her war was not symbolic, it was strategic, and it worked. Rome did not conquer Kush, it negotiated. That line alone reshapes assumptions. It reminds us that even at the height of Roman power, there were boundaries. There were regions where domination was not guaranteed. There were leaders who forced the empire to reconsider. And one of those leaders was a woman, a one-eyed queen from the deserts of Nubia, standing before the largest empire of her time, refusing to kneel. Today, her story matters for more than historical curiosity. It challenges the idea that Africa's ancient past was passive. It reminds us that power dynamics were more complex than often portrayed. It proves that leadership, courage, and political intelligence are not confined to one civilization or one gender. When we speak of ancient greatness, we must widen the lens, because history is not only written in Rome, it is written in Kush, in iron and gold, in desert wind, in pyramids rising from Sudanese sand. Amanirenas may not have carved her name into Roman triumphal arches, but she carved it into survival, into independence, into the continuation of a kingdom that refused to disappear. And perhaps that is the greatest victory of all.